Good evening, welcome to another show of Science and Politics. So if you don't know, this is about a 1-hour show where we discuss some of the top issues in science and politics going on today. So what we have for you in this show is first up, the policing bill, the one that you've seen all of those protests about. Well, it seems to be uniting the left and the right on this issue, those that are pro-Brexit, those that are anti-Brexit, everyone across the board, except maybe the hardcore core of government, seems to think there's something a bit fishy with this. So we'll be looking at what impact that is actually going to make on our rights and freedoms. And then I've got a special guest with me here that I'm going to have a very interesting discussion with about that. After that, you will have noticed that Dominic Cummings has been back, and he was back in the Commons answering questions on his new science coverage for things that he said about Matt Hancock, things that he said about how he actually got the gig in the first place. But we are going to talk about what is the actual quality of science policy understanding going into this new agency that's going to be set up. And we are going to talk to a professor of research policy on that and getting the breakdown on how good or not so good ARIA actually is. After that, we'll have a section on a mystery animal. So last time you really enjoyed what we did about tardigrades, those cuddly little sort of millimetre long water bears that can survive in outer space, that can survive being boiled, that can survive being deep frozen. Well, we thought because you found that fun, we'd do another animal as well that's got some remarkable properties. So if you want to see that, stick around. After that, we'll have a 15-minute break where we will then hop onto the Patreon. So if you're already a Patreon supporter, you've got access to it. If you're not, you'll have 15 minutes to go and sign up, and you're not going to want to miss this one because my special guest here is going to stick around to discuss all of the issues we've been chatting about in the show, but also, well, let's say he's on the other side of the Brexit debate from me, and we're just going to rib each other and grill each other and have fun with it with a few beers in hand. So I think you probably don't want to miss that one. Okay, so that's it. Let's crack on with item number one, which is the policing bill. And the issue about this is that this bill is about, 300 pages long or something, and it is being rushed through Parliament. It just pops out of nowhere, gets pushed through Parliament with a lot of Parliament, because that has been our history, and very much so our recent history, to have those colourful carnivals when we've had lots of battles going on in this country, but it has been that very visual wrestle for the soul of our country, and we cannot have our democracy as it is, loud, noisy, verbal, expressive, suddenly be sanitised so that the men in suits in Parliament don't get bothered by it. That is no way to go about it, and so we are, I think, across the board quite opposed to this, and it's brought together some new fusions that could work together going forward, and some surprising fusions. So previously, I did a little summary of what the new bill actually means for parliamentary demonstrations right here in the heart of our capital city. And so, George, could you play the clip, please, so that you take the audience through the little diagrams that I've been drawing here. This new policing bill that Priti Patel wants to bring in, what does it mean for big demonstrations in Parliament Square? Like, for example, the People's Vote marches that we had, or the celebrations that you saw on Brexit Day. They all took place here, Parliament Square Gardens, right next to the Palace of Westminster, in the heart of our democracy. So, how did things used to be done, and what does this new bill mean for how they can or can't be done in future? Now, the way it was set up before was Parliament Square Gardens itself is all restricted from having a stage or having loudspeakers on it. So if you want your licence in order to have a stage here and loud systems here, you would apply to come and drive your truck, a sort of stage truck, to about here. There's the front of the truck, and then it would open up a stage, and you could have your speakers here blaring out across Parliament Square Gardens, the amplified sound system, and all the people watching here. This, incidentally, is Churchill's statue, which is now heavily guarded, heavily guarded, heavily guarded, heavily guarded, right? So people would, in People's Vote marches, for example, come down Whitehall here, come down, flooding down, come onto the green here, where the stage would be set up, everything licensed, everything fine, and then you'd have your event right here. And it's a wonderful experience being there, whether being on stage or... So, my guest here tonight is none other than Richard Tice, one of the founders of Leave Means Leave, previous chairman of the Brexit Party, now leading the new party, Reform UK, and also a businessman as well. So the whole lot. And Richard, lovely to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much for having me in this amazing, seriously cool studio.
Yeah,
I'm very jealous.
Check out the science stuff.
Well, I know, I wasn't a scientist.
Grow.
I failed at most science exams, but it's a bit scary.
So we meet again, because last time we met, I don't know if you recall, but we did a debate.
We did indeed,
with one of the London universities.
It was one of those few debates I lost.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was at a university, so as we all know, the culture there is just absolutely needs to be reined in.
And you took the mickey out of my football team. I mean, it was a double disaster.
Yeah, I did thoroughly wipe you there, and I thought you were a very nice man, but obviously seriously wrong on so many things. But we now have some issues that we actually deeply and passionately agree on. And you signed a letter, or wrote a letter, with my colleagues, my co-director of March for Change, Thomas Brofato, Naomi Smith, the CEO of Best for Britain, also Anna Bird of European Movement, and an independent protester about the importance, regardless of whether you're in the left or the right, whether you're pro-Brexit or you're anti-Brexit, or you're trying to petition for the NHS or any group's rights, the ability to get out there in front of the cameras when the backdrop is Parliament, when the backdrop is Downing Street, is absolutely fundamental to the public communicating with the public and politicians in the heart of our democracy. And we're jointly shocked that this government are rushing through a bill without time to discuss it, without wanting to throw this to public conversation that would sanitise that and would clear that out.
I mean, it was a very, very powerful coming together of activists and campaigners from different sides of all sorts of debate, but in particular, obviously, on the Brexit side and the Remain side. And actually, I think that's the strength of it. And it was really noticeable on social media. I think some people literally nearly dropped their phones in shock that we had done that, and full credit to you and everyone for sorting that. But this is a properly serious moment. What really struck me and strikes me and actually terrifies me is that here is a government that basically banned protest temporarily. Oh, don't worry, folks, it's just a temporary ban. But then during that temporary ban, they introduce a permanent ban. I mean, there is nothing more dictatorial, authoritarian, and frankly terrifying. You might expect it from a dictatorship, but we like to think we're living in a democracy.
Just when the public were being compliant with everything, taking the opportunity to then bake it in permanently.
And the speed at which they've done it is sinister. And the fact that they've done it now, rather than waiting just a few months, if you believe the roadmap, just a few months' time, the House of Commons will be full again, and there'll be plenty of time to discuss, frankly, one of the most important issues and the unintended consequences of it, that for all of us, who believe in politics and who believe in trying to change things for the good, it is so fundamental. And I'll give you a really good example of where this goes very badly wrong. So I organised the celebratory event on the 31st of January last year, and we did it at some speed. We came up with the idea literally on January the 1st, 2020, and we submitted the application to the GLA to have an event on that night, Friday the 31st. And the decision was a decision for the GLA.
Yes.
Okay? Now, within a week of me advertising and announcing that we were going to hold this, I had very, very senior Conservatives phoning me up, literally pleading and begging me not to hold this event. That it would be wrong, it would be inappropriate, it would all sorts of reasons. And many of your viewers may wish that we didn't hold the event. But from a democratic point of view, just imagine, instead of me saying, I hear what you say, but actually it's right to hold it, just imagine if those very senior Conservatives had phoned up their friend, their Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and said, Priti, look, this bloke Tice, he won't listen to me, so just use your discretion and ban it. Yeah. I mean, just think what that really does. And that in itself is horrendous. And the thing is, there's no form of appeal, there's no review system, there's no independent arbitrator, none of the usual checks and balances that you would expect to see in any significant legislation like that. But when it comes to something as dramatic and significant as this, I actually think that it's deeply, deeply sinister. And we all come together
Those
on that.
images from your Brexit day in Parliament, you know, I don't begrudge that at all. You know, you had your day there. We'd had plenty of days there.
Yep.
We'd done lots of people's vote marches and campaigns. We'd got our visuals out. We'd represented ourselves. I've been on stage there many times, and it's a fantastic feeling when you're on stage overlooking Parliament Square Garden and all those crowds going back. You can see it all packed out, and you know the Parliament is there, and you have Westminster Abbey behind you, right? And it's just that feeling of, in all the world, this is London. This is, you know, the origin of so much of Western, modern Western democracy and how we do things. And to think that, you know, was ripped away, all that visual imagery that we've had that goes into history now, and we've got it documented, and you've got it documented for yours as well, and those championing the NHS or women's rights and all these different things, they have their visual representation there, and to wash it out and to sanitize it what is that about? So, do you feel, so given your example, that the Conservative Party is somewhat having their revenge on you? That they thought, right, okay, they didn't do what we wanted, next time we'll just go. So it's not anti-lefty, but it's kind of like anti-anyone who could question us without our say-so.
It might even be just anti-Tice, who knows? No, I think it is. It's a control thing, isn't it? And, you know, the politicians in government have exercised unbelievable, unparalleled, unimagined levels of control with no scrutiny, no checks and balances over the last 12 months. And I'm afraid to say, I think some of them have actually found that sense of power. You know,
that's exactly what I was
they
thinking.
found it rather beguiling. You know, some of them, dare I say it, rather enjoying this sense of power. And they're slightly getting off on it. I hate to say it. And
this is one of the things that I think you can probably speak to more than me, but I was wondering, and I wanted to ask you this, was because within the Conservative Party, there is on the right, you know, in the ERG predominantly, that tradition of libertarianism, of free speech and all the rest. And they've gone a bit more quieter with this now. And clearly this bill is important to them. That's why they're rushing it through. You know, we are in the middle of a pandemic. There's tons that this government need to get on with and the Parliament needs to get on with when it's not sitting properly. And they're prioritising this.
But, you know, this bill is, I mean, it's an absolute mishmash. And it's like the worst of American pork barrel politics.
Yeah.
You know, because you could actually carve this bill up. And there are some good things in this bill that address what Conservatives want to address. So why don't they say, I tell you what, folks, let's actually split it up into 3, 4, 5 different bills and go through them properly. So the ones that you know, on other issues, they could put through, and they could have a series of sunset clauses. So, right, let's impose it now, it lasts a year, and then it drops away unless we redebate it in more normal times with proper scrutiny. They could do all of that. No, they've deliberately chosen the opposite. And that is what is so sinister and so terrifying, because once it's done, with this majority that they've got, who knows when any future government is going to be able to come back, reason to tack on this protest issue. That should be after 12, 18, 24 months to say, right, what works and what doesn't work and we need to change.
And it's not a one-off either, is it? Because you've also got them trying to change the system to have more first-past-the-post systems going on with, for example, mayoral elections and things like that. You've also got the boundary changes that are coming in, and you've also got loosening up of the amount of money that you can spend in elections, and all of these things, and also transparency, you know, reducing the amount of transparency needed in some of these elections. All of these things which line up together to suit the Conservative Party bunkering into more opaque and settled in power.
Yep, and they don't address other things that should be addressed, like, you know, postal voting fraud and other issues. And I do find it utterly extraordinary and very, very telling about the nature of the individuals involved at the highest level of government that one just would not have believed possible.
So who, I just thought of this now, who in this context would you say that you're disappointed in? Like, as in, they're largely on the right, they're in the Conservative Party, you thought they would be of the same sort of like mindset as you, but they're not. I mean, we've got Steve Baker, for example, he's the head of the EOG, and he wrote a joint piece with Dominic Grieve, the arch Remainer. So they paralleled what you and my colleagues did, but within the sort of Conservative fold. But there hasn't been a lot of rallying within the Conservative
Party. No, there really hasn't.
Party.
They've been far too quiet. There's a few valiant soldiers fighting the battles. I think Sir Charles Walker, probably comes out this.
Gave that great speech in Parliament,
and he's given actually a number of great speeches throughout lockdown on you know, lockdown issues. And Desmond Swain. But otherwise, most of them are very, very quiet. And some of them, you know, they talk a good game, but then they vote through with the whips. They fold at the last minute. You know, this is the thing about the Conservatives. They have a long track record of talking a good game, warm words, waffle, but then actually when it comes to deeds and action, they just quietly slip through the whipping chamber and vote with the government.
All for an easier life.
All for an easier life, or a future job or promotion, or you know, in order to get a peerage a bit further down the track. Be a good boy.
They're very
be a good
good
girl.
at knowing how to buy off each other within the Conservative Party.
It's
They've got it down to this really bizarre art form, don't they?
Oh, it's the worst form of you know, basically buying people off. Pork barrel politics, cronyism. It's the worst of the worst. You know, it's why we stand actually for fundamentally reforming the House of Lords, and that's a whole separate debate. But it is one of the things that they use to buy people off.
That is, yes, that's
and
very
it's
true.
just not acceptable. You know, if we hold ourselves up to be one of the mothers of all democracies, then we have to stand up tall and proud and actually and do what it says on the tin. You know, not fill the tin full of fivers here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah, and otherwise faith entirely goes from the whole system, and I think the younger generations are already getting pretty jaded. Another question about the right here, because I notice commentators like Julia Hartley-Brewer warning before you see all of this, you know, lockdown stuff, and then stopping outside protests with it. That's going to morph into a police state. That they want to extend this permanently, and there were plenty of people on our side that didn't like the government but were supportive of, you know, lockdown for flushing out the virus. We're like, oh, don't be ridiculous. That's you're just going more extreme now to try and get attention. But now that the left, if you will, have come out and said, oh my God, what is this bill? What are you doing? And the left is flaring up, getting out in the streets, and it's much more lefty kind of visuals. I feel as though some on the right have gone quieter on the issue because they don't want to say, we agree with what you're saying. They're kind of saying, well, we were saying it first, but now you don't have legitimacy to say it because you supported this before, therefore I'm going to sulk. Whereas actually we need to find a way to do the odd bedfellows thing.
No, I think what's probably happened is
so where are the voices on the right outside the Conservative Party that should be saying, right, I'm irritated by you, but let's do the shoulder to shoulder on it?
I think what's actually happened is the voices on the right who've been against lockdowns for a whole bunch of reasons. I think we've been so focused on that that we've almost fallen into the trap of slightly missing the real dangers of what's going on.
Right.
And to be absolutely honest, I think that's where, I mean, Julia Hartley-Brewer, she spotted this very early. She spotted the trend, and she just basically forecast a bit into the future. And her forecast is badly and sadly coming true, and it is in a whole bunch of ways. It's when everybody over the age of about 60 and said, so why aren't you manning the barricades with me? And all of a sudden it's, oh no, it's not quite there, it's not quite what I meant. Ooh. And it's this...
So that's what you mean about talking the game to reassure people.
But then actually they kick it down the road, and you get the warm words, and then you get the waffle, then you get the weasel words, and you just can't trust any of it. And it stinks. And this is the consequence of that. And very few people in the conservative freedoms and libertarians that people like to suggest that Boris Johnson is the head of.
Yeah, and it's, Boris Johnson himself has always bigged himself up as that, and he's very, very quiet on the matter. He hasn't come out batting for it.
Not at all. It's very strange. I think, to be honest, he's just being pulled from pillar to post on so many issues, and my gut is that actually he really just hasn't really focused on this. From what we know, whatever anybody thinks of Boris Johnson, no one's ever accused him of being a workaholic or someone that really focuses on the detail. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, he always wants to be the front man on someone else's
he was always
brain.
the front man, but he was always, he was always late to dinners. He was always the first to leave after he'd given a speech. And I fear this is the way that the government is being run and organised and led. And you're going to talk about Dominic Cummings later, but in a sense, actually, his testimony and what he says about what went on in the heart of government when he was there, I think will be really, really important about some of the lessons that we learn going forward. That I think will.
Talking about going forward, any pushback from your own base, from your own party? Why are you associated with these guys?
None at all. Actually,
really?
No, literally none at all. People thought, actually, do you know what, on this, that's really good. I really felt there was
we found the same, right?
Yeah,
and I was nervous about this.
I
thought they were all going to come out, and you were a platform, all of that I was expecting. But I was surprised by so many people saying, thank God, finally, conversation, this is really interesting, this is really exciting. I want to get out of my own rut. I want to do things differently. I want to find other voices that can agree on some of the fundamentals here.
No, it was very warm, and there was even a bit of humour, which I'll talk against myself. One person on Twitter who says, "Crikey, dealing with Tice, I hope you washed long and clean and hard afterwards."
Yeah, that'll be one of our guys. Yeah.
But look, I mean, actually, it was similar on our side. A lot of people said, actually, this is so important. Of course. Yeah. And I think what it brings together is on a lot of this stuff, it's not left or right. It's actually about common sense, right and wrong. And I think there's going to be many issues going forwards. When you've got an authoritarian government with this size of majority, this is what happens. And it's one of the reasons why, one of our key things is electoral reform. Mm-hmm. We don't like first past the post.
Yeah. Because so you're up for PR, are you?
We're completely up for PR.
Right. Okay.
That's absolutely part of our manifesto. We stood on that, albeit obviously other issues featured in the 19 election. But no, that's very much part of our contract with the people. First past the post government, basically, it leads to a two-party system. You see it here, you see it in the US.
Yeah, and in the US it's so toxic like that.
And so it becomes more toxic, more divisive.
Very little room for freshening things up.
And so it actually, what it does is it reduces choice.
Yeah.
It reduces different new ideas. And the whole point about whether it's in business or politics, actually, you want disruptors, you want new ideas, and new parties coming forward. And that's because that's how you change things.
And the more you have two sides entrenching, the more they become more and more dependent on the money, on the big business to support the systems of corruption that keep those penned in place.
Correct.
Whereas if you can splinter things off and people are forced to make coalitions, you have to be more creative and dynamic and fluid.
And it also, if you've just got a two-party system, and first past the post, we touched earlier on the cronyism of MPs being bought off their votes, and that's what happens. And
because they've got nowhere else to go.
They've got nowhere else to go. And so that's why I think it's so important. That's why we keep using the word. This stuff needs reform. And yes, we're not being dogmatic on where it should end up. What we're saying is you've got to have a proper, open, big national debate on some of this stuff.
Yep.
And there's a bunch of it I would like to see referendums on. Whether it's the House of Lords reform, have a proper grown-up national conversation about it, and then have a referendum. And likewise with the electoral system. Now,
and it's mature, well-managed referendums.
No, you could do. And so there was one back in...
The Swiss are good at doing this.
The Swiss are very good at doing it. So yes, we had a alternative vote system, and essentially the Tories slightly sort of stage managed it. But actually, if you say referendums should be on an issue maybe every 15 years, well, we're actually, believe it or not, we're only about 4 or 5 years away from properly having. We should have another referendum on that.
Yep. Now I've got this in my hands. This is today's Guardian, and so I saw it today.
Not a paper I read frequently.
Really, you surprised me, Richard. Right, and so here's the interesting thing. So we agree on the policing bill.
Yep.
We agree on the importance of PR. We've actually agreed before when we've talked about, as you start coming out of the coronavirus crisis, you need to be having scientific data on stresses in the NHS, the cancer backlog, mental health, domestic abuse. And we also agree, because I've seen your for March for Change, same as Labour.
Yep. They will kick the can down the road on the public inquiry.
Yep.
They'll delay it and delay it, say we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and we'll always be in the middle of it.
Yep.
Until actually, frankly, we've all just moved on. Actually, they should be appointing a panel now. They should be appointing a senior lead judge. They should be agreeing the terms of reference. Instead, what they're going to do, they're going to kick it down kick the can down the road. I mean, that process alone would take 3 to 6 months, and then they're going to tighten.
Hold that thought and keep people in suspense because this is going on longer than I expected. And what we need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we need to move on with the show. But we've obviously got so much to chat about that I'm going to throw one more question at Richard, and then he is going to be here, he's going to have some drinks while we do the rest of the show, and he will come back for the Q&A where you can ask him questions. You can roast him if you like, you can insult him if you like. Going to be Brexit being a main one. Very briefly, how do you think it's going so far, and how does it meet your expectations?
Look, what we said at the time of the deal just before Christmas was that it was a giant leap forward from our point of view. We said it still had flaws, and the flaws have manifested themselves very, very quickly. We said this at the time of the general election. The issue would be over Northern Ireland, and the way that they had designed that in the withdrawal agreement. And my word, we've seen it.
So you were saying that while Boris Johnson was denying it?
Correct.
Yep.
And I talked about him and not going into the detail. It's a shocker. And people in Northern Ireland, I said at the time, the electronics
to debate later. Right, and best on Byline TV. It's about fishing.
Yep, that's the other big one. Which I haven't yet talked about, but
But
fishing
then we
is
want
bad.
to talk about that briefly. I think so. Can you play the video, please?
Yeah, for the future of my family, not so much me. I think me and many others have perhaps made a mistake. I just thought there'd be a better future for myself and for my children and my children's children, to become independent, to have our own fishing. A consignment to Europe from Brixham, absolute nightmare. I think I was sort of taken along on the ride that we were all on, with the bus going around. We were going to save £350 million per week that we're throwing into Brussels, that we're going to have this free trade, and Europe were going to be desperate for our fish because we'd have control of it all and we'd be in control of our own destiny.
The key is we've got our fish back. They're now British fish, and they're better and happier fish for it.
Very disappointed with, I don't think there's any room to make any jokes about this current situation. 44 years I've been selling fish, and overnight it's pretty much been destroyed.
How would you describe the news?
Disappointed, very disappointed, and yeah.
So Richard, my question is, Nigel, that immediate impact, on his Twitter feed he didn't talk about it at all. You know, he was so.
Yeah,
And
so-
we
so
asked
let's
some of
be-
these.
we-
So
we
we asked
said-
some of these fishermen. You know,
Yeah, no, so we said
where's
very
your champion?
clearly.
Where's Nigel?
Well, we said very clearly the moment the deal was announced that the two big flaws was Northern Ireland, which we've just touched on, and fishing. And there's no question that the EU, they've put the squeeze on. No question. Fishing has been sold down the river. There are things that can be done. And if this government, frankly, was as resolute and determined as they are with the policing bill that we've just been talking about on fishing, actually there are things they could do. So, for example, they could actually guarantee the purchase of all the same quantity of fish that the fishermen you've just seen on that video and others across the whole industry,
But
they could do that. And, well, he said it day one. He's been focused on a variety of things. And yeah, it's we're about, what are we? We're 10 weeks in, and there's no question fishing has been abandoned by this government despite all their promises, and it's another classic case where you get their warm waffle words, but the reality behind the scenes is not there. So there were some things in the free trade deal that we liked, and we always warned about fishing and our fears. But the point is, we're sending billions of pounds over this year. Just don't send the money, folks, until you sort this out. It's very, very simple. And it's like with the Northern Ireland issue. The EU have already invoked Article 16. They should agree with Arlene Foster, invoke Article 16, and put some leverage on the EU, particularly given what's going on with the vaccines and
withhold
things.
payments that you've agreed to just because you don't like the deal that you've signed yourself.
I know, but it's the way the EU are implementing some of the things that have been agreed, which is not.
But you'd have to prove that legally.
Say again.
You'd have to prove that.
Yeah, and there's going to be legal issues going on. I mean, the EU is suing us over Northern Ireland, where we're perfectly entitled to do what we're doing. There's a whole bunch of stuff, but ultimately we've got leverage, and we should use it. They're not using it. That's very disappointing. And there are other practical measures that this government could put in place to help the fishermen during this interim phase that they should be doing that they're not doing.
So how much do you think it was the government rushing the deal and not paying attention to the detail around the fishermen and their needs, and how much do you think it is the government neglecting them now, or do you think it's both?
It's definitely both, no question at all. There's no question at all.
And who is going to be their champion now, Richard?
The fishing...
Yeah, the fishermen.
There's a whole bunch of us. I mean, from our side, June Mummery was always the champion. She was always, very focused on the fishing, and we're all championing it. But this is the danger of the power of this government, and they're just basically riding roughshod over everybody. And so we're not saying that there's not work to be done. It was always going to be work in progress, and with any trade deal, there's always ongoing stuff, and there's always practical issues about implementation which people face, and that's what we've got. But short term, it's very bad that the government is not helping the fishermen out of these pragmatic difficulties.
While I agree with you, I actually agree with you on all of that, and the government are absolutely neglecting them. I also believe that Nigel in particular acted as a sort of Pied Piper for them, making all these question and answer session while we receive questions also from the audience.
Yep. If there's
Thanks
interest,
ever so
let's
much.
continue.
So sit there for a while, because now we're going to move on to the next section. And when we play the video for the next section, then you can go over there and treat yourself to the vast cocktail cabinet that sprawls before our eyes here.
I wouldn't be able to answer any questions if I overdo it, but anyway.
Well, that's part of the plan.